The year was 1941, and on a date that will apparently live in infamy, the United States officially joined in on a conflict known as World War II. But jumping half a century later, it was time to milk the deadliest conflict in human history. So now you can feel what it's like to storm the beaches of Normandy as the Americans. Push those Germans out of Stalingrad as the Russians, commit war crimes, liberate France, commit even more war crimes, and then go back home half the man you once were.
RPG!
Hello people, I'm Tommy, and the situation has become serious foobar. We've got Jerry's on the other side, we are pinned down. Look at those bastards over there. It makes me sick. You know, this situation really brings me back to the original Call of Duty Trilogy. I remember that day like it was yesterday. World War II and first-person shooters. First-person shooters and World War II. They go together like peanut butter and jelly. Games like Wolfenstein 3D were pioneers in the FPS genre, and was a game that took place during World War II. Just like in real life, you blasted Nazis and killed a mech suit wearing Hitler. Jumping to the early 2000s, World War II shooters were still on the rage, with games like Battlefield 1942, Day of Defeat, and Medal of Honor. But in 2003, we would get a game that no one was prepared for. A game that would kick off a franchise that would eventually lead to the greatest trilogy of games in history. But before we get to that point, we have to talk about the first trilogy in this franchise. Also, yes, I am aware there are side games made, Call of Duty Finest Hour, Call of Duty Big Red One, Call of Duty Fates Revelation, Call of Duty at the Olympic Games. I really don't care, we're just sticking with the big boys today. The first Call of Duty starts off with you playing from the American perspective, where you're learning about the basics of the game. Throwing grenades, movement, switching your secondary weapon is always faster than reloading, that kind of thing. After that, we are then thrust right into the true World War II experience. And we'll be playing on veteran difficulty, because there's no room for little bitches in my Call of Duty.
Move on!
You know, there really is no shame in playing on Hardened. So the story's pretty simple. There's this guy with a mustache named Adolf Hitler. He has his ass spread all across Europe, and it's up to us, the Allied powers, to stop him. And as we push closer and closer to Germany, we all begin to realize that the real Call of Duty were the friends we made along the way. Call of Duty 1 is split into 4 different parts: the American, British, Soviet, and final missions. You start with the Americans, where you parachute into German lines to secure a clear landing for the invasion of Normandy. The British missions have you fighting on both the front lines, which are some of the worst missions in the game, while doing some classic espionage on the Germans, which are some of the best missions in the game. Then there are the Soviets on the Eastern Front, as they are finally being able to push against the German forces after the Battle of Stalingrad. And then there are the final missions, which are just one mission for each of the 3 countries you play as. The Americans take some documents, the British destroy a rocket silo, and of course, the Soviets take control of the Reichstag, plant the flag of the Soviet Union, ending the bloodbath in Europe. And so that is the story of the first Call of Duty, but what about the gameplay? Well, as somebody who's been playing COD since the good old Modern Warfare games, I can confidently tell you Call of Duty 1 is by far the worst game in the entire franchise. It's not even close. I'm not gonna say the game doesn't have any redeeming qualities, because there are, just that they are buried under the steaming load of horse shit that is 90% of this game. When I switched my difficulty from veteran to hardened, that wasn't entirely because I was a complete bitch. It was because the veteran mode in this game is terrible. To me, the biggest struggle with Call of Duty 1 is when you're fighting in very open environments, which is most of the game. You'll be getting killed by enemies you can't even see, and the repercussions of that can be severe because the checkpoints in this game are a complete joke. After doing some research, it seems the reason checkpoints vary so much in missions is because it has to do with the amount of health you have. So if you're crawling through the level because you are at a sliver of health and anyone can kill you, guess what, fucker? You're not getting a checkpoint. So if you die, have fun doing all of that again and then getting killed by the same enemy who appears as a pixel on your screen. And then there's the health bar. Oh god, only 2 games in the series use a health bar like this. Call of Duty 1 and Call of Duty World War II. And we know how good that game was. The health bar will force you to be on the ground at all times, being aware of your surroundings and make sure no enemies are in sight. And then you can crawl all the way to the next objective. You know, fun. But the last thing I want to talk about is the missions themselves. To me, most of them are completely forgettable since they are pretty much going from point A to point B, then finishing the level. But then there's a special kind of hell in the missions that you have to wait for reinforcements to arrive. Pegasus Bridge and Pavlov's house. These 2 missions can go fuck themselves. You can't dig in and defend yourself because if you don't follow the objective, the game will just kill you. And enemies come from all over the map, so hopefully you've got enough health to trigger those checkpoints, kid. But I understand. I've been a bit spiteful of this game, so what does it do right? Well, the cutscenes before each level are pretty nice, but give it 5 years and World at War will show you how it's done. In terms of weapons, they operate how they should, and the M1 Garand does have that amazing ping noise. But there is one mission in the game that not only did I like, but I absolutely loved, and is probably my favorite mission in the whole trilogy. British mission number 3, Eater Dam, is the crown jewel of this turd of a game. Small areas, easy to navigate, faster and closer combat. You have to run through this dam to get to the other side, and then back again to the other side again. This is the only mission in the game where I was happy both playing and finishing the level. Unfortunately, this mission's quality is not enough to save Call of Duty 1. I'm sure this game had a great multiplayer back in the day, as most Call of Duties do, but looking at this game 20 years later, it's definitely aged. Hopefully this isn't an omen for things to come, but let's jump to the sequel game, Call of Duty 2. Europe is at war by the bad mustache man who has expanded his buttocks all across the land. It is up to the only contributors of World War II, the British, Americans, and Russians, to destroy the Third Reich once and for all. Immediately starting the campaign, the most notable difference is the order of the missions. In the first Call of Duty, you played as the Americans, British, and then the Soviets, but in this game you start as the Soviets, play as the British, and then end with the Americans. The game is pretty much just like Call of Duty 1, except for the fact that this game is actually pretty good. Visually, the game looks very similar to COD 1. The map still looks like a compass, all the weapons are still present, the health bar being gone is fantastic, checkpoints actually show up now, and the game does a much better job at getting you right into the combat with a way more forgiving veteran difficulty. Not that this game isn't without difficulty, it's definitely got its moments, but it is more than possible to get through without ripping the hair off of your scalp. In terms of the missions, you've got the Americans fighting on the Western Front, the Soviets fighting on the Eastern Front, but for the British, they are fighting in the North African campaign, which is a part of World War II that almost never gets any coverage in any media form whatsoever. So that's neat. Some of the nitpicks I have with the game is that due to how the game is pretty easy, especially compared to Call of Duty 1, it makes these missions way less memorable for me. It's kind of a double-edged sword type thing because missions like Pavlov's house are awful, but it's because I hated it so much that it's an incredibly memorable level. Call of Duty 2 doesn't really have that, and even worse for me is the story doesn't really conclude. I understand that Call of Duty 1 ended with the Soviet flag being planted on the Reichstag, because that's easily the best way you could end a European theater-centric World War II shooter, but in COD 2, it ends with the Americans crossing the Rhine, and then the game's over. It's pretty anticlimactic. But in the end, Call of Duty 2 is so much better than the first game that I can forgive the story, as it was trying to be different from a game that it's already pretty similar to. And so that leaves us with the final game of the trilogy, Call of Duty 3. So we've seen a terrible game, a great game, and now we will take a look at a game. Story of this game is Hitler's cheeks are enlarged all over Europe. You know the story at this point. Call of Duty 3 makes many changes and is a much bigger leap forward for the franchise compared to COD 2. Most notably, the game going into this cinematic shot when it wants to go in for story time, which happens only about 500 times throughout the game. Another big difference is the way you throw grenades, which is horrible, and it's not a shock that we've never seen this grenade mechanic ever again. Oh yeah, and everything needs to be either a cutscene or a QuickTime event. Gone are the days of placing down a C4 with a press of a button. Now you've got to slowly go through the process of pressing a button, turning the analog stick, and pressing another button. Also, this game has lots of different perspectives of World War II. You fight as the Americans, the British, the Polish, and of course the easiest levels in the game where you play as the Canadians. Yeah, so no Russian campaign here, and also the game almost entirely takes place solely on the Western Front, so if you like history of the boring half of the European theater, Call of Duty 3 is the game for you. Okay, but now I need to derail this whole discussion for a bit, because Call of Duty 3 isn't just the most okay Call of Duty of the trilogy. Call of Duty 3 is cursed. The reason I'm showing such a limited footage of the game is because my recording software decided it wanted to not work after the first mission of the game, leading to the footage looking like this. Also, this game is responsible for murder. Call of Duty 3 killed my Xbox 360. So after trying to load into Chapter 10 of the game, which is the last third of the game, I was informed that the disc couldn't be read, and the game immediately crashed to the greatest home screen in gaming. So I turned the game back on, and the same thing happens. Then I put in another game, and then a screen I never even knew existed popped up saying the disc couldn't be read. I put in more games, and the disc still couldn't be read. So in conclusion, Call of Duty 3 destroyed my Xbox 360. In all honesty, this Xbox 360 has been going strong for well over a decade, so its optical drive breaking was going to happen sooner rather than later, but I need a scapegoat here, so it's all Call of Duty 3's fault. So other than the fact that I can't even finish this game because Call of Duty 3 does not exist on Steam, let's just assume that the real Adolf Hitler was about the journey, not the destination. The original 3 Call of Duty games really did feel like they were just another World War II shooter, just due to how frequent those types of games were around that time. Do I recommend them today? Well, Call of Duty 2 is a pretty good game, and Call of Duty 3 was pretty interesting up until it destroyed my childhood gaming console. So in conclusion, just play World at War. That flashback did not help the situation. So you know what? I'm gonna have to deal with these motherfuckers the old-fashioned way. That's what we call tactical supremacy.